Hey there, deep divers. Ever feel like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like I'm just wading through the sea of information,
Oh, tell me about it.
especially with these big, mysterious topics, right?
Right.
And that's what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
You guys have been sending in, well, you've been exploring Unchained disciples, seeking wholeness,
Mm-hmm.
and sent over some really interesting notes on spiritual warfare,
Okay.
specifically about curses and demons.
Now we're talking.
And I have to be honest, full disclosure, when I saw those notes, I thought we were going full on Hollywood,
Exorcism.
exorcism, like bring out the holy water, bring out the crosses, that whole thing. But it turns out this source dives into the idea of wholeness in a really surprising way.
It really does. What I found fascinating was how this source defines wholeness, because it's not just about the absence of curses or demonic influence or anything like that.
Right.
It goes much deeper than that.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. Unpack that for us. What does this deeper definition of wholeness look like according to the source?
So it talks about how true wholeness, it really encompasses every aspect of our being.
Okay.
Spiritual, emotional, and yes, even mental health.
Yeah.
It's about freedom from, the baggage of our past, those negative thought patterns that can really hold us back.
Yeah.
And then, any potential harmful forces, internal and external.
So it's not just about being not cursed,
Right?
but about striving for this positive state of being.
Exactly.
This sense of like complete well-being,
Yeah.
almost like a holistic approach, but to spiritual health.
Yeah, absolutely.
But before we get like too deep into that,
Yeah.
because you know me, I'll go down the rabbit hole.
Please, let's.
I have to ask, the supernatural, demons, curses, this stuff is just inherently fascinating.
Oh, 100%.
Why do you think we're so drawn to these topics?
You're absolutely right. There's just this undeniable allure to the supernatural.
Right.
And the source actually touches on this,
Okay.
suggesting that this desire, right, this desire to tap into something bigger than ourselves, that's like a universal human experience.
So it's not just me and my like slight obsession with ghost hunting shows.
Not at all. In fact, the source gives some really relatable examples of this.
Okay.
Think about things like, palm reading, tarot cards, even something as simple as cracking open a fortune cookie.
All right. You got me there. I've definitely consulted a fortune cookie or two in my day.
Haven't we all?
Right.
But I think it speaks to that. All these practices, they point to this deeper longing to understand our place in the universe, to maybe exert some control over our future.
It's like this innate human need to feel like we have some say, right?
Yes.
In our destiny, even if it means like looking outside of ourselves for those answers.
Exactly. And the source even draws a parallel to some biblical examples.
Oh, okay.
Think about the Israelites turning to other gods.
Right.
Or Eve seeking knowledge in the Garden of Eden.
Right.
It's that same desire for knowledge, for control, that's always been a part of the human story.
And it's like that desire is still so subtly woven into our culture today.
Oh, absolutely.
Just look at, how many people are fascinated by like astrology and zodiac signs? That's like this deep-seated need to understand ourselves and our place in the universe.
I agree.
Speaking of things that might dictate our future, let's talk about curses.
Okay.
I'll admit, when I hear the word curse, my mind goes straight to Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
Dramatic finger snap, lightning bolts, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
But the source paints a slightly different picture.
Definitely. It does. This source defines a curse as, this is interesting, quote, a solemn utterance intended to invoke a supernatural power to inflict harm or punishment on someone or something. Okay. But what's really interesting is it makes this distinction between curses that originate from God versus curses that come from people.
Now, that's a distinction I hadn't really considered before.
Right.
Are there examples of both types of curses in the Bible?
Absolutely. For example, think about the serpent in the Garden of Eden.
Okay.
That was a curse directly from God.
Right.
But then you have examples like the story of Balaam, where a person attempts to curse the Israelites.
Right.
So the source makes it very clear that not all curses hold the same weight or origin.
Okay. So this brings up a pretty big question for me, and I'm sure for our listeners too. Can a Christian, someone who identifies as a Christian, can they be cursed? Like if someone, say, not of the faith, tries to curse them, does it have any power?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because the source argues that while anyone can be a target of a curse, a Christian's righteousness, which they receive through their relationship with Jesus, acts as a sort of hedge of protection.
Okay, so like a spiritual force field.
Yeah, like a barrier of God's grace and protection that surrounds them.
I like it.
However, and there's always a however with these things,
Right.
the source also brings up this concept of the evil day.
The evil day. Now that sounds ominous.
It does, doesn't it?
What exactly does that mean?
So it refers to a time when even the most faithful might experience intense spiritual attack or hardship.
Okay.
And the point is made that this isn't necessarily a punishment from God,
Right.
but rather a test of faith.
That actually reminds me of the story of Job.
Ooh, yes.
He was considered a righteous man, yet he went through unimaginable suffering.
Exactly. Job's story, I think, really challenges our understanding of why bad things happen, even to good people. And it speaks to this idea that even with a hedge of protection, our faith will be tested. Life throws curveballs, even for those who walk with God.
That's definitely a lot to ponder.
Isn't it?
But we've covered curses. What
Yeah.
about demons?
Okay.
This is where, at least for me, the lines between the supernatural and psychology, it can get a little blurry.
I agree. And the source seems to acknowledge this overlap as well.
Can you give us an example of what you mean?
Well, the source highlights how a lot of what deliverance ministries address,
Yeah.
things like hearing voices, experiencing nightmares, even struggling with addiction,
Mm-hmm.
all of these could potentially be viewed through both a spiritual and a psychological lens.
Right. So is the root cause a demon
Right.
or something else entirely? I mean, that's like the million-dollar question.
It is a complex question, and I think that's where things get really interesting.
Right.
Because the source then dives into the different types of demons that are mentioned in the Bible.
Okay.
We've got seducing spirits, we've got spirits of infirmity.
There are different types of demons.
That's what the source is saying, yeah.
Okay.
It even mentions miracle-working demons, which really makes you think.
Miracle-working demons.
Yes.
Wow. That's
Think about some events in history and whether they might have a different explanation than what we've traditionally been told,
Right.
Raises so many questions.
Miracle-working demons. Wow. That's definitely something to unpack further.
Yeah.
But first,
Yes.
before we get ahead of ourselves, the real elephant in the room. Can a Christian, someone who's walking with Christ, be possessed by a demon?
According to the source, that's a question that has sparked a lot of debate.
Well, it certainly gets to the heart of some pretty big theological questions.
Yeah.
About free will, God's protection, and just the nature of spiritual warfare in general.
Huge.
I'm on the edge of my seat here.
It is a big one.
Right.
And there isn't like a, cut and dry answer.
Right.
It's something that, people a lot smarter than us have been going back and forth on for a really long time.
Right. And we see that a lot with this topic.
Civil law.
It's very nuanced.
Absolutely.
But for the sake of this deep dive,
Okay.
let's just say hypothetically
Okay.
that demonic influence is a real possibility.
Okay.
The source goes into some of the common practices that are used by deliverance ministries today,
Mm-hmm.
but it also raises some interesting criticisms.
Yeah, it does. You have practices like casting out demons,
Mm-hmm.
binding, rebuking, using the name of Jesus to command these spirits to leave.
Mm.
All tactics that are mentioned in the source.
And I think those are all tactics that a lot of people associate with, like,
Exorcisms.
exorcism,
That's
right? Like,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
kind of the, the image that comes to mind.
Exactly.
Hey.
But what the source is highlighting is that there's a danger in attributing every negative experience, every struggle, to demonic influence.
So we can't just, like, go around blaming demons for everything.
Right, exactly.
Which I think is tempting,
Oh, totally.
right? Because it's easier sometimes to point the finger outward than to look inward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, it's just way more interesting to blame a demon.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
It's a better story.
It's a way better story.
Yeah.
But the source, I think rightly so, cautions against neglecting the role of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
We have free will. We make choices. And sometimes those choices have consequences regardless whether or not there's a demonic influence at play.
Totally. It's like that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
100%.
Like, we have to take ownership of our own stuff.
Yes. We have a part to play in our own spiritual well-being.
Exactly. And this is where the source makes a really fascinating comparison.
Okay.
It kind of contrasts these modern deliverance practices with Jewish exorcism practices from Jesus's time.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I'm curious to hear your take on this. What were those like?
They sound very different. Think potions, amulets.
Okay.
Elaborate rituals.
Mm.
Like a stark contrast to the authority that Jesus displayed in the Gospels.
Mm.
You know, he didn't rely on rituals or formulas or any of that.
He just spoke with authority.
Exactly.
Right? Like, be gone.
Yes.
And it's gone.
And that's the difference.
Yeah. Wow. It's almost like there's been this evolution or maybe even a distortion of these practices over time.
100%.
And it makes you wonder how much of what we see today even aligns with the model that Jesus set forth.
Right. It's a key question.
Mm.
And it's definitely something that the source is encouraging readers to consider.
Okay.
It actually offers a sort of litmus test.
Ooh. A litmus test.
Yeah, for discerning whether or not a particular deliverance method is biblically sound.
Okay. I'm all ears. What's the litmus test?
It's surprisingly straightforward. The source suggests just asking two simple questions. Did you see Jesus do it or teach it? And did you see the apostles do it or teach it?
So basically looking for practices that are directly modeled or instructed by Jesus and his disciples.
Exactly.
Like going straight to the source material.
Yes. Go to the source. What did they actually do? What did they actually teach?
Don't just take someone's word for it.
Right.
Right.
And this emphasis on the source material makes me think about a point that the author made about the power of Jesus' name and his authority.
Okay.
Because it's not just about saying the right words in some magical formula.
Right.
It's about understanding the weight, the power behind those words.
It's not just what you say, but whose authority are you drawing on?
Exactly.
Right.
And the source actually gives the example of the 7 sons of Sceva from the book of Acts. Remember, they tried to cast out a demon using Jesus' name, but without any real belief in his authority.
Right.
And let's just say it didn't end well for them.
Yeah. That's a good reminder to leave that stuff to the professionals.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Don't try this at home, folks.
Right.
Leave it to the priests.
Seriously.
But it highlights this really important point that the source makes about true spiritual authority coming from a genuine relationship with Christ.
Okay.
It's not just about reciting a formula or going through the motions.
Right.
It's about the heart behind it.
It's about that deep, abiding trust in Jesus.
Yes. And that makes me think about the part in the source where the author talks about their own personal struggle with fear and faith when it came to this topic.
Yes, that part really resonated with me too.
Yeah.
Like I felt that so deeply.
Me too.
Because the author talks about this feeling of needing to say the perfect prayer or like renouncing every little thing from their past to be fully protected.
Yes.
And it's like this constant state of spiritual anxiety.
Yes, exactly. And the source makes a really good point. It says that kind of hypervigilance can actually be counterproductive.
Right.
It can keep us trapped in a cycle of fear and uncertainty, constantly looking over our shoulders instead of walking in the freedom that comes with knowing that we're loved and protected by God.
It's like we're so busy worrying about every little thing that might be a demonic attack that we miss out on the peace and the joy that comes from simply trusting in Jesus.
Yes, 100%. It's about shifting our focus from a place of fear to a place of faith.
Which is so much easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely.
Because fear is a powerful emotion.
Oh, it is. It really is.
Yeah.
But I think what the source reminds us is that our faith shouldn't be in rituals or magic words.
Right.
It should be in Jesus himself.
Right.
It's in that surrender, that trust, that we find true liberation.
And you know, it's easy to get caught up in that fear, right? Like all the what ifs, especially when we're talking about something as mysterious as the spiritual realm.
It's a lot.
But as you're saying, it really just comes down to faith, doesn't it?
It does. And that's where the source brings in this really beautiful connection to mercy.
Okay.
It talks about how God's mercy has the power to override any negative situation, to heal any wound, to reverse any curse. And here's the thing. It's not something that we earn or deserve. It's free. It's pure grace.
It's a good reminder that we serve a God who is so much bigger than any curse, any demon, any fear that we might be harboring.
Amen to that.
But I have a feeling, and maybe you're feeling this too, that this deep dive has sparked more questions than answers.
Always.
And honestly, that's okay.
No, it's more than okay.
Right.
It's the hallmark of a good deep dive.
Right. It means we're like really engaging with these ideas. We're wrestling with these big questions.
100%. That's how you grow.
Exactly. And speaking of big questions, one that keeps coming up for me, and maybe this is something our listeners are thinking about too, is if demonic influence is real, how do we reconcile that with the concept of free will?
Ooh.
Like, do we always have complete control over our thoughts and our actions, or are there forces at play that we may not fully understand?
Again, questions for the ages.
Right? Like, literally,
This has been debated since people could talk.
Mm,
And I don't know that there is like a simple, easy answer.
right,
But maybe that's part of it.
right.
Part of the beauty of faith.
Yeah.
That mystery, that grappling. You know,
The constant
it's
seep
that
in.
constant tension between what we know and what we don't know, between faith and doubt.
Yes, and it's in that tension, I think, where we really do a lot of our growing.
I agree.
Because it keeps us searching for deeper meaning. It keeps us searching for a greater understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
And within that searching, within that tension, we find ourselves, I think, drawing closer to God, leaning into his grace and seeking his guidance.
That's beautifully said. And it actually leads me to another question that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking about.
Sure.
If some of these experiences, these struggles that we face, do have a supernatural root, how do we know when it's time to seek deliverance,
Right.
to seek help from others, versus seeking therapy, or even simply taking responsibility for our own choices and behaviors?
Why is that line?
Where's that line? Right? Because I don't think it's always clear cut.
It's not.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where discernment comes in,
Right.
right? Really seeking wise counsel from people that we trust.
Yes.
Whether that's, spiritual mentors, pastors, therapists.
Yeah.
Listening to that still small voice of the Holy Spirit within us.
Yes.
And ultimately trusting our own intuition.
And I think trusting that process, too, because it's a journey and it often looks different for everyone.
Every single time. There's no formula.
There's no formula.
Which is hard for some of us.
Oh, especially me. I like a formula,
Me too.
right? But it's not always a straight line either.
Never. It's messy.
It's messy. There's twists and turns.
Detours, wrong turns.
Right. But the important thing, I think, is that we keep moving forward.
Yes.
That we keep seeking truth and that we keep our hearts open to God's guidance along the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong journey of becoming more and more of who God created us to be.
And on that note of pursuing wholeness and embracing the journey,
Yes.
I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
We've covered so much ground.
We have.
We talked about curses and demons,
Right.
the allure and the potential dangers of the supernatural, and then that importance of grounding our lives in faith rather than fear.
It's a lot.
But more than just giving you the answers.
Right.
My hope is that this deep dive has encouraged you guys listening to ask your own questions,
Yes.
to keep digging into these topics,
Absolutely.
to continue seeking truth wherever you will find it.
Love that.
Yeah.
Keep exploring. Keep questioning. And most importantly, keep trusting in the God who loves you more than you could ever possibly imagine.
Beautifully said. Until next time, deep divers, keep those questions coming.